Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I have the honor of being able to speak with someone that I've been able to build the relationships with over the past few years. So, Jim, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit in a second, but Jim McEleney is a franchise consultant with FranNet. Jim, you're a great asset in helping people just kind of learn about what getting into business for themselves looks like and finding the right fit for them. So Jim, if you don't mind introducing yourself, giving a little bit of background on you and now what you're doing in your role
Sure.
as a franchise consultant.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for
Sure.
the opportunity here.
Of course.
I am a consultant with a group called FranNet. In simple terms, what we do is we really help people who are thinking about business ownership for themselves look at the options through the franchise model and the wide range of industries that might be the right match for them to consider. One of the things that I like to share with my clients is that I actually was a candidate myself and was a client of FranNet 10 years ago. So I'm a little bit like the person, at least one of the profiles that we oftentimes help, which is someone sort of reflecting on what are their options beyond life in corporate. That was me 10 years ago. And with the help of my friend, a consultant, I actually became a multi-unit operator in one of the national hair care brands. And I've been fortunate over the last 4+ years to be on this side of the desk, helping people the same way I was helped 10 years ago.
Awesome. Very cool, Jim. I think a unique perspective for your clients that you work with, that you've been in their shoes learning, and then you made a choice to get into business for yourself. And now you're, in a role kind of, I think, shepherding people into making the best decision for themselves. So on that note, Jim, I mean, what is your specific process like? Because I think everyone has different goals and different backgrounds and different financial circumstances and then where they want to get to. So what is your process like, just learning about people, personality, background, needs, wants, and then, what is that process like?
Yeah, I say to my clients up front, I say this process is going to require a bit of patience, right? Because what I don't want to do is rush to any sort of transactional activity. I really spend those first couple of meetings really trying to understand what's bringing them to this moment. What is the family support system look like for them as they're contemplating making this kind of a big change, because it is a family decision. And we spend a lot of time, first couple of meetings, where I'm really just trying to understand them, their goals, their transferable skills. I usually prepare them. I say, we might not talk about individual franchises till we get to maybe our third or fourth conversation. And I think that's in their best interest, right? Because it really is going to be then led by, what do I learn about them, this vision for how this business might sit inside the rest of their life. And from there, we have some tools within FranNet, some assessment tools. But I would say more of it is through the discovery and the conversation of really helping them build their business model. And then it puts me to work looking at what possible matches could be out there, and then supporting them through their research journey till they get to a decision of either yes or no.
Awesome. Yeah, I think just going at a good pace and giving them the, getting the background you need and they need to make an informed decision. And then kind of the next step, Jim, is I think if someone was doing this search on their own and you were in the position where you were using a consultant to help your decision, if you didn't have that, there's thousands of models out there. You don't know, necessarily what's good, what's, less great of a franchise. Or I think a big resource that you give people is you and FranNet vet models and have a good kind of portfolio of franchisors that you're able to recommend. So how important is that in the resource you provide your clients?
I think it is important, Mike, because sometimes people come to me after they've been doing that research on their own for a while and their eyes are rolling back in their head, right? There's somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 franchises in the US these days. And we introduced to maybe a little bit more than 200 brands these days in FranNet.
Sure.
And we've focused on quality brands that we've vetted and that we would be proud to own ourselves. And those are the brands that we bring to our clients. But I think when you're doing the research on your own, sometimes people sort of fall in love with a business because maybe they've been a customer of the business. But, what I always say to folks is, let's really focus on what does that business do for its clients, but also what's going to be your role as an owner, right? Because the reality is the owner role is really the critical role that my clients need to focus on in terms of understanding what they're going to be doing day to day. And so we talk a lot about that and making sure that we're not only looking at a sound business model that they can afford and be comfortable in, but also that they can be successful in as an owner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the time there's that maybe fallacy of thinking that, hey, I need to be passionate about that specific thing to be successful, or I needed to be a customer of it. Or I think for a lot of people, it's doing a deeper dive, and you help them do that about the model, the support, the staying power of that business is the most important thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Now, Jim, maybe you've never had a challenging sort of client circumstance, and you've been lucky. I'm sure you have had lots of these. If you don't mind sharing an example, without naming names, of course, of maybe had challenging circumstances, or it was just hard for them to, find the right fit, but you help them do that, and they've been very successful in that business ever since. Any story you can share in that vein?
Yeah, I think somewhat generically, what I mentioned before about, where's the family support system? And I think that that's critical, right? So, so often when I'm in early conversations with candidates, I really talk a lot about, what's the mindset of their spouse, right, and their family. And part of that is certainly to understand maybe there's a role for those other folks in this business if we find them the right business, but also to make sure that the spouse is feeling like a participant in this process, right? So we talk a lot about where's the right time to bring your spouse into some of the discovery. It's probably not practical to have them on every call, but we can zero in, I think, sometimes on a few critical points in the research process where it's going to be important to have a spouse involved. And I've learned this the hard way, right? I mean, I have worked with clients who maybe I didn't ask the right question early on about spouse, or maybe they told me they were all set and it was their decision. And then we get far along in the process and they realize that maybe it wasn't as much just their decision as they thought.
Sure. Yeah. Even if they're not formally involved, the spouse, they're involved, right? In some way or another. So
yeah, this is, usually this is family assets usually making the investment decision, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's a good approach, have a conversation with them in one way or another. And then Jim, I'm sure you have clients with, varying financial, backgrounds and situations. And I think that, when we think about misconceptions about franchising, it's kind of big sticker prices that don't meet every financial need, but in reality, there are franchise models that fit every kind of budget. So how do you navigate that different financial situations and meeting the needs of the people that are looking that you're helping?
Right. Well, I think you're right. I think sometimes this is people don't know what they don't know, right? And so early on, what I like to talk with folks about, even before we start to talk about sort of what's the comfort level they have in the quantum of an investment, is making sure that they understand that there are different options in franchise, right? Immediately, the mind goes to the brick and mortar models, which are going to be more capital intensive. But there are mobile models where maybe you're traveling to the customer's, the client's office or home to provide a service. There's also home-based models, right? And so the investment level will vary based on those. So I like to come at it first from the standpoint of making sure they understand the different array of kinds of franchises and the investment levels that come with that, right?
Sure.
And then we've got to look at what their own comfort level is, and also look at their own financial situation to see what they're able to bring to the table. And of course, there are ways to finance the rest of that investment sometimes, but we get there over time. Just like the research process, usually the funding conversation is a multi-conversation as well. But the good news is people need to know there are options. And I think they're surprised sometimes that franchise business ownership is maybe more affordable than they thought it was when they first started working with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing, Jim, I kind of like hearing success stories, and I think people watching may as well. So any particular success story you're willing to share about a client you worked with, and the model that they got into and the success they've had in that model since joining?
Yeah, I can. And I'll tell you, I think somewhat generically, the process, the part in the process that I think I love the most is when I'm bringing business possibilities to a candidate. And they're usually industries that they never thought about for themselves, right? And it's challenging them to think about how they might map their transferable skills to a new industry. And it's very energizing because now they're thinking about doing something that they see how they can be successful in it, but it's brand new and they're going to learn a lot.
Right.
I had a client last year that actually we started talking about the senior care space. And, his mind immediately went to some of the more traditional business models in senior care. But through our work together, what we found for him was actually a model that helps modify homes so that individuals can stay in them longer. And, we immediately think about seniors, but think about veterans as
Right.
well, right? Or other, maybe it's people at midlife who have had some sort of event where, they need to accommodate themselves in their house differently. Maybe
Right.
it's a stair chair, or it's a ramp or something. And to see his face light up with the potential of him bringing that sort of service to someone and giving them options that maybe they didn't think they ever had, was really gratifying for me. And he's killing it. He's doing great. I'm seeing some of the progress that he's had. He's in some really nice communities for the demographics for that kind of business. He's building great relationships with referral partners. And, this is someone who came out of fintech, right? So I think he surprised himself with how well he's doing. But I'm really proud of him and the risk he took, and it's paying off for him.
Sure. Sounds like he's doing good and earning good, which is a nice
Yeah, yeah,
in.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm sure very gratifying for you to, be able to help people achieve that dream that they had.
Yeah. I mean, I love the stories, and the stories are different, whether they're 6 months away from when they started versus where they're at a year from now, et cetera. So just watching that trajectory, and all the highs and the lows that sometimes come with it, right? I stay connected to the people I've helped and worked with, and want to follow their progress and see if there's anything we can do to help them be more successful than they would be on their own.
Awesome. That's a very cool story, Jim. And my last thing before kind of leaving the floor open to you to have a conclude our conversation. But any common misconceptions that you run into? I think we've kind of mentioned a couple things. Maybe the funding and the economics of getting into franchising is one. Maybe I need to be familiar with that industry to get into it is another. But any other misconceptions that you've run into with clients, and how have you helped them kind of change their way of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, people generally gravitate toward a franchise because they like the idea of a system and the structure that comes with that.
Yeah.
Right. They're getting a running start into owning their own business. But sometimes I think people come to that thinking that every last thing they're doing in their business is going to be controlled by the franchisor. And I've seen franchises that are very mature, very institutionalized. And I've seen others that are still sort of finding their way and taking feedback from their franchisees. So I think for anyone that sort of thinks that they're coming into business ownership and franchise and thinks that maybe, two arms are going to be tied behind their back and they have to do everything exactly the way the franchisor says, you want to embrace that system, but there is opportunities for creativity and contributing from the learnings you have as an owner to improve that system as well. So, I say to people, think of the pros, but don't be so quick to judge some of the cons sometime, and really get underneath and understand the culture of the brand you might be studying to see what kind of independence and creativity you're going to be able to bring to owning that business.
Right. Yeah. There's all kinds that fit all types of needs and wants for franchisees. So
Absolutely.
You're completely right. So,
Yeah.
Jim, now, I mean, what I like to kind of conclude these conversations with is if there's maybe someone that's watching this that is perhaps in corporate and, they're thinking about, I'd like to get out and maybe do something on my own, but I don't really know how to do that and what that looks like. What would you say to that person that's considering taking a step into at least learning more?
Yeah, I think, I think the first thing to know is we're a no-cost service for people who are looking to start their research, right? So, think of that as a free pass to engage. There's about 80 of us in FranNet that sit across the U.S. and Canada, and our job is to really help people first through education, right? So helping folks get to the point where they can make a judgment call for themselves as to whether this is even a business model that they want to pursue for themselves. So take advantage of that education. We have a lot of learning available on frannet.com, and we love when it triggers someone to the point where they actually are then engaging with a consultant, whether it's myself or someone that's more local to them in their area. We all work together behind the scenes to help each other with what we know about individual markets around the U.S. and Canada. But I think that's really the biggest thing that I would encourage folks is just get through the education, make a decision for yourself as to whether this is something you want to go further with. In that case, yeah, we can start to help on the matchmaking side and some of the other resources we bring. But I think foundationally, education is really the first place where I always encourage people to start so that they can, just confirm for themselves before we ever talk about a brand. Is this the right path for them in their next step?
Yeah, it costs nothing to learn, right? And whatever the decision is, I think for a lot of people, it can be meaningful to just have given it, a good amount of thought and consideration, whatever direction they end up going.
Yeah.
So
and
Jim,
it feels daunting, right? Research feels daunting, but you can chunk it up into small pieces and just set a goal for yourself as to how you can learn more.
Have a process in place and a coach and consultant to help you get there and go through that. So where can people get in touch with you, Jim, if they do want to reach out and get in contact?
Yeah, sure. So, with FranNet, my email address is going to be J McEleney, so JMCELENEY @frannet.com. You can also find me through frannet.com, and you can look me up as a consultant. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I do a lot of education through LinkedIn. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. And from time to time, you'll see some of the education that I'm trying to bring to folks around business ownership in general.
Awesome. And I can attest to the fact that Jim is a great resource. So if anyone wants to utilize him as they go through their discovery, they'll be in good hands for sure.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate
it. Well, thank you for joining, Jim. I really appreciate it. A lot of great insights. A great conversation. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks. Thanks everyone for listening.